Hi, and welcome to The Genderly Show, a podcast about gender for everyone, where we celebrate the diversity that makes each of us unique. My name is Eden Hare. As a woman who is transgender and living with the many aspects related to the uniqueness of gender, I hope you find today's episode interesting. Today we're going to be talking about being cisgender or transgender, and what that actually means. So let's get started. Cisgender and transgender, two terms that we hear bantered about a lot in the media today, sometimes in not very supportive or accepting fashions. So I thought it would be worthwhile to actually talk about what these two terms mean. Part of the reason why I was interested in doing this is because cisgender people really don't have any idea what it actually feels like to be transgender. And at the same time, transgender people do not really understand what it means to be cisgender. So, since I fall into that realm of transgender people, it's still going to be a little bit hard for me to explain, but I do have an example which I'm going to share, which will kind of help, I hope, for the cisgender people to understand the transgender experience and for transgender people to understand the cisgender experience. But before we get to that example, let's go back and talk about what it really means to be cisgender or transgender. Both of these are adjectives that we use to describe ourselves. Cisgender means on the same side of my gender. CIS, the prefix, means on the same side, whereas trans means to be on the other side. So someone who is cisgender has a gender that is on the same side as their assigned sex at birth. So a cisgender man is someone who is comfortable with being a man, identify as being a man. A transgender person, so a transgender man, is someone whose gender, the way they view themselves, their gender identity, is on the other side of their assigned sex at birth. So a transgendered man is a woman, or to be more precise, a female who identifies, who sees themselves as a man. So cis, you'll also hear cis being referred to as comfortable in same gender. Just a convenient way of actually saying CIS. But it means the same thing. So another way of saying that is that a cisgender person is comfortable with their gender matching their assigned sex at birth, whereas a transgender person is not comfortable. Their gender identity is the opposite of, or different, to be more precise, than their sex assigned at birth. So typically, cisgender and transgender terms are considered binary categories. But as I mentioned in the gender identity episode, transgender is a term which is often used as an umbrella to refer to not only the transgender gender identity, but all of the non-binary and other gender identity categories. So transgender, again, is that umbrella term because it is on the other side from cisgender. Cisgender and transgender are considered by many to be more binary categories. Cisgender, if you're comfortable in same gender, that means that you are binary. You are male or female, man or woman, and comfortable with that. If you fall directly into the transgender binary, then you are a transgender woman or a transgender man, and you are comfortable with that binary. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. There are also transgender people that feel a little bit more of both. Now, being cisgender or transgender has nothing to do with sexual orientation. Now, we're going to talk in more detail about sexual orientation in another episode, but I feel like it's necessary to call this out here because I hear from various sources, people believe that if you're transgender, you're automatically gay. You're automatically attracted to the same sex. And that's not necessarily the case. Cisgender people can be sexually attracted to their same sex. That's how we say cisgender gay men, cisgender lesbian women. And the transgender community can fall into that same space as well. But they can both be attracted to the same gender. They can both be attracted to the opposite gender. They can both be attracted to some other gender. And we're going to talk about it more in a future episode on sexual orientation. So another way of describing this whole thing, which I heard from a good friend, talking about gender identity and sexual orientation before we move off of that, is that gender identity is who I go to bed as. And sexual orientation is who I go to bed with. Okay, so let's leave the sexual orientation discussion. So here's the point. Neither cisgender nor transgender are actually genders. So when you hear someone say, or when someone refers to me as being transgender, that doesn't tell anyone else anything other than, I'm not cisgender, maybe, but even still, it doesn't really tell them anything because it's just an adjective. And without knowing something, you can't figure out what the other side is. So to describe me as a transgender woman would be correct. And it would also tell someone something that they need to know or may need to know about my assigned sex at birth, because they have to have that information for some reason. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. Because the majority of people do not need to know that I am a transgender woman. So these adjectives are used to describe whether a person's gender identity actually aligns with what everyone else just assumed it would be based upon our observable sexual characteristics, which we talked about in the gender identity episode. Someone who is cisgender does not go around saying, hi, my name is Steve and I'm a cisgender man. They just don't do that. They say, hi, my name is Steve. Well, for me as a transgender woman, I don't walk around and say to people, hi, my name is Eden and I'm a transgender woman. I don't even bother saying that. My name is Eden. Nice to meet you. And I'll leave it at that. The majority of people do not need to know that I'm a transgender woman. And when I say that, who does need to know that I am a transgender woman? Well, first of all, my doctor, because she needs to know that every year for my annual physical, I will always need a prostate-specific antigen test, a PSA test, to evaluate me for prostate cancer, because I am a transgender woman. I will never, ever need a pap smear. Likewise, a transgender man will never need a PSA test, but will always need a pap smear up until the point that they've had their phalloplasty. So our doctors need to know that information. It's there from a clinical perspective. I do not identify as a transgender woman. I identify as a woman. So here's the story I was referring to when I was talking about providing some form of reference that can help a cisgender person understand the transgender experience. And I'm going to give credit to a good friend of mine, Brooke Testerman, whom I work with. And she gave me this example, which she had heard somewhere else, and we've kind of embellished it a little bit, but here we go. So for the cisgender people that are listening to this episode, assume that you have a favorite pair of shoes. And every day when you get up and you get dressed to go to work, you put on this pair of shoes. They're the most comfortable pair of shoes you've ever owned. They go with every outfit that you have. They can be worn in every situation, and you just love these shoes. But today, when you put them on this morning, they suddenly were the most uncomfortable shoes you've ever owned. It felt like there was a stone in the bottom of them. And so you took them off, and you couldn't feel a stone in the sole of the shoe. You couldn't feel a stone or anything odd about it anywhere in the shoe. But as soon as you put them on, it felt like there was a stone, maybe near the ball of your foot. And they were so uncomfortable. And so you reach for another pair of shoes and you put them on and they're exactly the same. And you quickly run through all of the shoes in your closet and you find that they are all the same. The most uncomfortable things that you have ever worn. Every pair of shoes hurts your feet. But you still need a pair of shoes to go to work with, right? Typically our employers do not get overly enthusiastic when we show up without shoes on our feet. So you put on a pair of shoes and you go to work. And the only thing that you can concentrate on all day long is the fact that your feet hurt. And these shoes are so uncomfortable. And you just can't wait to get them home and get them off. That is about as close as I can get to giving you, as a cisgender person, the transgender view of things. So we get up and we are uncomfortable with who we are, with who the world expects us to be. And eventually, you decide that you're going to do something about it and change your gender identity, change your expression, change the notion of how others see you. The last thing I want to mention in this episode, I've been pondering this question of gender identity and can a transgender person feel or identify as being cisgender? Okay, so that sounds kind of funny, right? Can a transgender woman identify or feel like that she is a cisgender woman? I believe the answer is yes. So I walked into my therapist's office not too long ago because I realized that when I go through my day, I don't think about my gender at all. And I walked into his office and I said, I feel like I know what it feels like to be cisgender. And he says, like, okay, explain that to me. So I looked at him and I said this. Every morning I get up and I do what every other woman does. When I get up, the dog wants to go for a walk. So I throw some clothes on and out we go. When I come back, I get ready for my day just like every other woman. I have a shower, get dried off, put my panties on, put my bra on, and admittedly, like many other women across the United States, indeed probably North America and the world, I put my breasts in my bra. And then I figure out what clothes I'm going to wear that day, do my hair, do my makeup, and I don't think about it again. At all. And he looked at me and he said, oh, okay, but you do go to the restroom at some point in time of the day. And I said, absolutely, I do. He said, well, like, how does that work? And I said, well, if I'm dressed the way that I am sitting in your office here, in a blouse and a skirt, then I walk into the bathroom, I lift up my skirt, pull down my panties, sit down on the toilet, pee, and wipe my vulva like any other girl. And he looked at me and commented, well, like, you understand, like, things don't line up. And I said, just because my vulva is deformed doesn't mean that I don't have one. So yes, I do actually believe that a person who identifies as being a transgender woman or a transgender man can feel like or start to identify as being a cisgender woman, cisgender man, depending upon where they started, right? So for me, why can't I identify as being a cisgender woman? Even though my body parts don't line up yet, I don't think of them differently. This is what makes all of this sometimes so very, very confusing, right? For all of us, for people who are transgender and for people who are not transgendered. It makes it hard for cisgender people to understand the world that we live in as transgender individuals. And that's what I wanted to try to bridge a little bit, or as much as possible in this episode. Even then, it still doesn't quite get it. It's still not exactly the whole picture. And it's one of those things which is very, very difficult to do when neither side really has a common frame of reference to see the other's perspective. And that's one of the reasons why I like the shoe story. We all wear shoes. We all know what uncomfortable shoes feel like. And we all know how uncomfortable it is over the course of the day when we still decide that we need to, or we're going to wear those uncomfortable pair of shoes. I hope this has been an informative episode for you, that it helps clarify a little bit about the terms cisgender and transgender, that it helps you to see things from an alternate view, and why people who are transgendered, why transgender men and women experience or can experience gender dysphoria, and why it becomes so necessary to do something to align what everyone else sees with how we feel. Thank you so much for spending this time together with me and helping celebrate the diversity which makes each of us unique. Please remember to subscribe to the podcast on your favorite platform and follow us on Twitter @GenderlyPodcast. Until next time, be unapologetically you.